I was halfway through clearing my driveway at 2 in the morning when I saw Patricia Carmichael standing at the edge of my property in her bathrobe. Phone pressed to her ear, speaking in that shrill voice that had become all too familiar over the past year. The snowplow attachment on my truck rumbled as I pushed another load of heavy, wet snow to the side of my property. It was March in Summit County, Colorado, and we had just been slammed with 18 inches of unexpected snow. My phone had been ringing off the hook since midnight. As the owner of Rocky Mountain Emergency Snow Services, I had contracts with the county, 3 hospitals, 2 fire stations, and a dozen elderly care facilities that needed immediate access in weather emergencies. I did not have time for whatever complaint Patricia was about to lodge. I killed the engine and climbed out of my truck. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but I was already sweating under my winter gear from the hours of work I had ahead of me. Patricia was still on her phone, gesturing wildly at me with her free hand. "Yes, officer, he is out here right now making an ungodly amount of noise," she said loudly enough for me to hear. "The entire neighborhood is trying to sleep, and he has been running that machinery for over an hour. I have checked our HOA bylaws, and there is absolutely no provision for this type of disturbance." I walked toward her slowly, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Patricia, I am working under emergency services contracts. I have to clear access routes to the hospital and fire stations before morning." She held up one finger to silence me, keeping the phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, officer, he is right here. Randall Zimmerman. He lives at 4782 Pinecrest Drive. Please send someone immediately." I felt my jaw tighten. This was not the first time Patricia had tried to interfere with my business, but calling the police was a new escalation. As the president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association, she had made it her personal mission to enforce every tiny rule and regulation with the zeal of a dictator. Last month, she had sent me a violation notice because my garbage can was visible from the street for more than 12 hours. The month before that, she had complained that my work truck was parked in my driveway instead of my garage. "You are wasting police resources," I told her, keeping my voice level. "They have actual emergencies to deal with tonight. People are stranded. Roads are impassable. The hospital needs clear access." Patricia ended her call and fixed me with a cold stare. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and her makeup was flawless. She was probably in her late 40s, with the kind of rigid posture that came from years of yoga classes and a superiority complex. "The noise ordinance in Pinecrest Estates is very clear, Randall. No construction, maintenance, or other loud activities are permitted between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. You are in direct violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines. I have been very patient with you and your business, but enough is enough." "This is not maintenance," I said, fighting to keep my frustration in check. "This is emergency response. I have legal contracts with the county. People's lives could depend on access to emergency services." "Then you should have considered that before you moved into a community with strict noise regulations," Patricia said. "I suggest you pack up your equipment and resume your work at a reasonable hour. 7 a.m. would be acceptable." I stared at her in disbelief. "Patricia, by 7 a.m., this snow is going to be packed down by traffic and twice as hard to move. The hospital has already called me twice. They have ambulances that cannot get through their access roads." "That sounds like a hospital problem, not a homeowner association problem," she said, crossing her arms. "Now, are you going to comply with our community standards, or do I need to begin fining you?" Before I could respond, I saw the flash of red and blue lights turning onto our street. A Summit County Sheriff's deputy pulled up in front of my house, and I recognized Deputy Martinez immediately. We had worked together on several emergency responses over the years. He was a good guy, practical and level-headed. Martinez climbed out of his patrol car, surveying the scene. The snow was still falling steadily and visibility was poor. He nodded at me, then turned to Patricia. "Evening, madam. I understand there is a noise complaint." Patricia immediately launched into her prepared speech. "Yes, officer. This man has been operating heavy machinery in a residential neighborhood in the middle of the night. Our homeowner association has very clear policies about noise, and he is flagrantly violating them. I have asked him multiple times to stop, but he refuses to comply with our community standards." Martinez glanced at my truck, then back at Patricia. "Madam, are you aware that Mr. Zimmerman here has emergency services contracts with the county?" "That is irrelevant," Patricia snapped. "He lives in a private community with its own rules. He agreed to abide by those rules when he purchased his home. His business obligations do not supersede our right to a peaceful living environment." Martinez rubbed his face, looking tired. "Madam, with all due respect, emergency services operations are exempt from most local noise ordinances during declared weather emergencies. The county has issued a Level 2 snow emergency as of midnight tonight." I felt a small surge of satisfaction, but Patricia was not deterred. "Our homeowner association rules are private agreements between residents. They are not subject to county ordinances. We have the right to enforce our own standards on our own property." Martinez looked at me, and I could see the apology in his eyes. "Mr. Zimmerman, just to be thorough, can you show me your current emergency services contracts?" "They are in my truck," I said, grateful that I always kept copies of my contracts with me. I walked back to my vehicle and retrieved the folder from my glove compartment. Inside were contracts with Summit County, St. Anthony Summit Medical Center, the Silverthorne Fire Department, the Dillon Valley Fire Department, and several other emergency service providers. Martinez reviewed the documents carefully, taking his time despite the cold and the late hour. Patricia stood nearby, tapping her foot impatiently in the snow. "These all look legitimate," Martinez said finally. "Mr. Zimmerman, you are legally authorized to perform emergency snow removal services." "Madam, I understand your concerns about noise, but during a declared emergency, these services take precedence over local noise ordinances and private community agreements." Patricia's face flushed red. "That is absolutely unacceptable. I am going to contact the county commissioners first thing in the morning. This man does not have the right to disturb an entire neighborhood just because he has some contracts. There are other snow removal companies. Why does it have to be him? Why does it have to be at this hour?" "Because the hospital called me specifically," I said, my patience finally wearing thin. "Because I am the closest contractor with the right equipment. Because every minute we waste arguing is another minute that emergency vehicles cannot get through. Because this is my job, Patricia, and whether you like it or not, it is more important than your beauty sleep." "How dare you speak to me that way?" Patricia said, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I am the president of this homeowner association. I have the authority to fine you, to place liens on your property, to make your life very difficult if you continue with this attitude." Martinez stepped between us. "Madam, I think everyone needs to calm down. Mr. Zimmerman has the legal right to perform his contracted services. I would suggest you take this up with your HOA board and the county if you have ongoing concerns, but tonight, he needs to work." Patricia glared at all of us, then spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, which was directly across the street from mine. I could see her husband, a quiet man named Gerald, standing in their doorway. He gave me an apologetic wave before disappearing back inside. Martinez handed my contracts back to me. "Sorry about that, Randall. You know how it is." "Thanks for backing me up," I said. "I know you have better things to do tonight." "Stay safe out there," he said, climbing back into his patrol car. "Roads are bad. I have already responded to 4 accidents tonight." I watched him drive away, then looked back at Patricia's house. Every light was on now, and I could see her silhouette moving past the windows. I knew this was not over. Patricia was not the type to let things go, but I had work to do. I climbed back into my truck and fired up the plow. The hospital was waiting. The next 6 hours were a blur of snow, ice, and exhaustion. I cleared the main access road to the hospital, then moved on to the fire stations, then to the elderly care facilities. By the time the sun came up, I had been working for nearly 8 hours straight. My back ached, my eyes burned from the reflected glare of the snow, and my hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel. I made it home around 9 a.m., planning to grab a quick shower and a few hours of sleep before I had to go back out. The snow had stopped, but the forecast called for another storm to hit tomorrow night. This was going to be a long week. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw an envelope tucked into my front door. My heart sank. I already knew what it was. I climbed out of my truck and retrieved the envelope. Inside was a formal notice from the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association, signed by Patricia Carmichael in her flowing script. Notice of violation and fine. On March 15, 2025, at approximately 2:00 a.m., you were observed operating heavy machinery in violation of community noise ordinances as outlined in Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the Pinecrest Estates Community Guidelines. This violation has resulted in multiple complaints from residents and has created a disturbance that is incompatible with the peaceful enjoyment of our community. You are hereby fined $500. Payment is due within 30 days. Additional violations will result in increased fines and potential legal action, including liens against your property. I crumpled the notice in my fist. $500 for doing my job, for potentially saving lives, for keeping emergency services accessible during a dangerous storm. I was furious, but I was also too tired to deal with it right now. I went inside, took a hot shower, and collapsed into bed. I would figure out how to fight this later. I woke up 6 hours later to my phone ringing. It was David Chen, the administrator at St. Anthony Summit Medical Center. "Randall, I just wanted to thank you for your work last night," he said. "We had 3 critical ambulance runs during the storm, and if you had not cleared our access roads, we would have been in serious trouble. You probably saved lives." "Thanks, David," I said, still groggy. "Just doing my job." "I heard you had some trouble with your HOA," he said, his tone sympathetic. "Patricia Carmichael called my office this morning trying to get us to switch to a different snow removal contractor. She said you were causing disturbances in your neighborhood." I sat up, suddenly very awake. "She did what?" "Do not worry. I told her we have a contract with you and we are very satisfied with your services. But she was quite insistent. She said she was going to contact all your clients and tell them you were in violation of community regulations." I felt my anger rising again. "She cannot do that. That is interference with my business." "I know, but I wanted to give you a heads up." She seemed pretty determined. After I hung up with David, I called my lawyer. Tom Rodriguez had helped me set up my business 3 years ago, and he had handled a few contract disputes for me over the years. He was sharp, experienced, and did not tolerate nonsense. "Tom, "I need your advice on something," I said, and then I explained the entire situation, from Patricia's 911 call to the violation notice to her attempts to interfere with my clients. Tom listened quietly, then let out a low whistle. "Okay, so she is not just being a pain, she is potentially interfering with your business and trying to prevent you from fulfilling legal contracts during a declared emergency. That is a problem for her, not for you. What should I do? First, do not pay that fine. Second, I am going to draft a response to the HOA explaining that your emergency services work is exempt from their noise ordinances under state and federal law. Third, if she continues to interfere with your business, we can pursue legal action against her personally and against the HOA for tortious interference. What about the lien she threatened? She can try, but it would not hold up. HOA liens are only valid for legitimate violations of reasonable community standards. A court would laugh this out of the room, especially given your emergency services contracts. In fact, you might have grounds to sue the HOA for harassment. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Thanks, Tom. I knew I was in the right, but it helps to hear it from a lawyer. Send me all your contracts, the violation notice, and any other documentation you have. I will get started on this today. Over the next week, the situation escalated. Patricia sent me 2 more violation notices, raising my total fines to $1,500. She sent letters to all my clients, claiming I was unreliable and in violation of local regulations. She posted in the neighborhood Facebook group about my flagrant disregard for community standards. She even tried to call a special HOA meeting to discuss the Zimmerman problem. But I was not alone. David Chen from the hospital wrote a letter to the HOA board praising my services and explaining how critical my work was. Chief Thompson from the Silverthorne Fire Department did the same. Several of my elderly clients sent their own letters, describing how I had cleared their driveways during the storm so they could get to medical appointments. Even some of my neighbors started pushing back against Patricia. Mike and Susan Reardon, who lived 2 houses down, posted in the Facebook group defending me. Randall was helping people during an emergency. The noise was inconvenient, but it was necessary. Patricia needs to stop harassing him. Others chimed in with similar sentiments. It turned out that not everyone in Pinecrest Estates shared Patricia's rigid view of the rules. But Patricia doubled down. She hired her own lawyer and sent me a formal demand letter, threatening to foreclose on my house if I did not pay the fines and agree to cease all snow removal operations within the community between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Tom responded with a letter of his own, pointing out that emergency services operations were explicitly protected under Colorado state law, and that any attempt to interfere with those operations could result in criminal charges, not just civil liability. That was when Patricia made her biggest mistake. She filed a lawsuit against me in Summit County Court, seeking an injunction to prevent me from operating my snow removal business during restricted hours. Tom was delighted. "She just handed us the perfect opportunity to shut this down permanently," he said. "A judge is going to rule on this, and once we have that ruling, she cannot keep harassing you." The hearing was scheduled for April 12th, less than a month away. In the meantime, I continued my work. Another big storm hit on March 28th, and once again I was out at 2 a.m. clearing emergency access routes. Patricia called the police again. Deputy Martinez showed up again, apologized again, and left without taking any action. The morning after that storm, Patricia was waiting for me in my driveway when I got home. She looked even more agitated than usual, her hair slightly disheveled and her eyes red-rimmed. "This is not over, Randall," she said as I climbed out of my truck. You think you can just ignore the rules because you have some government contracts. You think you are special. Well, you are not. This is a community and communities have standards. If everyone just did whatever they wanted, we would have chaos. Patricia, I am not ignoring the rules, I said, too tired for another confrontation. I am following the law. There is a difference. The law does not apply inside private communities. We have our own governance structure. You agreed to it when you bought your house. And you are about to find out that HOA rules do not trump state and federal law, I said. Now, if you will excuse me, I have been working all night and I need to sleep. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path to my front door. I am not done talking to you. Yes, you are, I said, my voice hardening. Get off my property, Patricia. This is not just your property. This is community property. We all have a stake in maintaining our standards. The lot lines say otherwise. Move. We stood there for a long moment, locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Patricia stepped aside, but her expression was venomous. You are going to regret this, she said quietly. I am going to make sure you lose everything. As she walked away, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Patricia was used to getting her way, and she was not handling this well. I wondered what else she might do. I found out 2 days later. I received a notice from the county saying that someone had filed a complaint about my business, claiming I was operating a commercial enterprise out of a residential property without the proper permits. The complaint was anonymous, but I knew who had filed it. I had to take a day off work to go to the county offices and provide documentation showing that my business was properly licensed and permitted. The clerk was apologetic, explaining that they had to investigate all complaints, but it was clear this was a waste of everyone's time. Then my insurance company called. Someone had reported that I was engaging in unsafe snow removal practices and had damaged public property. Again, anonymous. Again, obviously Patricia. My insurance agent investigated and found no evidence of any damages or unsafe practices. But it still took time and energy to deal with. Patricia was waging a war of attrition, trying to exhaust me with bureaucratic harassment. But every attack just strengthened my resolve. And more importantly, every attack gave Tom more ammunition for our court case. This is perfect, Tom said when I told him about the false complaints. This shows a pattern of harassment and malicious interference. The judge is going to see right through this. As the hearing date approached, I started getting nervous. I had never been involved in a lawsuit before. I did not know what to expect. Tom assured me that we had a strong case, but I still lost sleep over it. On April 11th, the night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing all the documents Tom had prepared. My contracts, letters of support from my clients, documentation of Patricia's harassment, records of the false complaints she had filed. It was overwhelming. My phone rang. It was Chief Thompson from the fire department. Randall, I just wanted to call and wish you luck tomorrow, he said. What that woman is doing to you is wrong. Your work is vital to this community, and I made sure the judge knows it. I submitted a statement explaining how your services have directly contributed to public safety. I appreciate that, Chief, I said, feeling emotional. It means a lot. We have your back, he said. That is what community is really about, not HOA rules and property values, but people taking care of each other. The next morning, I put on my best suit and met Tom at the Summit County Justice Center in Breckenridge. The building was modern and imposing, all glass and steel against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. Patricia was already there with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Brandon Whitmore. Patricia was dressed in a conservative blazer and skirt, her hair and makeup perfect as always. She looked confident, almost smug. We all filed into the courtroom. Judge Catherine Morrison presided. She was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. Brandon Whitmore went first, laying out the HOA's case. He argued that homeowner associations had the legal right to enforce community standards, that noise ordinances were reasonable and necessary for maintaining property values, and that my emergency services contracts did not give me carte blanche to violate those standards. Your Honor, if we allow Mr. Zimmerman to ignore our community rules, what is to stop every other resident from doing the same? Whitmore said. The entire purpose of an HOA is to maintain consistent standards. Mr. Zimmerman knew these rules when he purchased his home. He signed the community guidelines. He cannot now claim exemption simply because he finds them inconvenient. Judge Morrison listened without expression, taking occasional notes. Then it was Tom's turn. He stood and approached the bench with a stack of documents. Your Honor, this case is not about whether HOAs can enforce community standards. Of course they can. This case is about whether an HOA can prevent a resident from fulfilling legal obligations under emergency services contracts, and the answer to that question is clearly no. Tom walked the judge through Colorado state law, citing specific statutes that protected emergency services operations from local restrictions. He showed her my contracts with the county, the hospital, and the fire departments. He presented letters from emergency services administrators explaining how critical my work was. Mr. Zimmerman is not running a leaf-blowing business at 3 a.m., Your Honor. He is providing emergency services that directly protect public safety. On the night in question, the county had declared a Level 2 snow emergency. The hospital had called him specifically because they had ambulances that could not access their facility. He was not being a nuisance. He was potentially saving lives. Tom then laid out Patricia's pattern of harassment. The escalating fines, the false complaints to the county and my insurance company, the attempts to interfere with my business relationships. This is not a good faith effort to maintain community standards, Your Honor. This is a vindictive campaign to drive Mr. Zimmerman out of business because Miss Carmichael does not like him. She has abused her position as HOA president to pursue a personal vendetta, and she has done so in a way that directly undermines public safety. Whitmore objected repeatedly, but Judge Morrison overruled him each time. She was clearly interested in what Tom had to say. Finally, Tom called me to the stand. I was nervous, but I tried to speak clearly and honestly. Mr. Zimmerman, can you explain what happened on the night of March 15th? Tom asked. I described the storm, the calls from the hospital and fire departments, my work clearing emergency access routes. I explained that I always tried to be respectful of my neighbors, but during declared emergencies, public safety had to come first. Have you ever operated your equipment during restricted hours when it was not an emergency? Tom asked. No, never. I only work those hours when I am called for emergency services. My regular commercial work is always during normal business hours. Whitmore cross-examined me, trying to make me look selfish and inconsiderate. Mr. Zimmerman, do you not agree that your neighbors have a right to peace and quiet in their own homes? Of course they do, I said, but they also have a right to functioning emergency services. If the hospital cannot be accessed, if fire trucks cannot respond to calls, people die. I think that is more important than a few hours of interrupted sleep. So you think your work is more important than community rules? I think emergency services are more important than HOA rules, yes. Patricia was called to the stand next. She tried to present herself as a reasonable person just trying to protect her community, but under Tom's cross-examination, her true nature came out. Miss Carmichael, you filed false complaints against Mr. Zimmerman with the county and with his insurance company, did you not? I filed legitimate concerns about his business practices, she said stiffly. Concerns that were investigated and found to be baseless. That is not my fault. The investigators clearly did not do their job properly. You also contacted Mr. Zimmerman's clients and tried to convince them to terminate their contracts with him. I was trying to help them find a more reliable contractor who would not violate community standards. But Mr. Zimmerman had not violated any community standards. He was operating under emergency services contracts that are protected by state law. That is your interpretation. That is the law, Miss Carmichael. The more Patricia talked, the worse she looked. She came across as petty, vindictive, and obsessed with control. Even her own lawyer seemed to realize she was not helping their case. Judge Morrison called a brief recess, then returned with her decision. I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony in this case, she began. The question before this court is whether the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association can enforce its noise ordinances against Mr. Zimmerman when he is performing emergency services work under valid contracts with county and state entities. She paused, looking at both sides. The answer is no. Colorado law is clear that emergency services operations during declared emergencies are exempt from local noise ordinances and private community restrictions. Mr. Zimmerman's contracts with Summit County, St. Anthony Summit Medical Center, and various fire departments are legitimate and legally binding. When he performs work under those contracts during declared emergencies, he is protected by state law. I felt relief wash over me, but Judge Morrison was not done. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the pattern of harassment that Miss Carmichael has engaged in. The evidence shows that she has not been acting in good faith to protect community standards. Instead, she has waged a personal campaign against Mr. Zimmerman that has included false complaints, interference with his business relationships, and escalating threats. Patricia's face went pale. This court finds that the Pinecrest Estates HOA has violated Mr. Zimmerman's rights and has acted in bad faith. The injunction sought by the plaintiff is denied. The fines imposed on Mr. Zimmerman are voided. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Zimmerman's legal fees in this matter. Tom squeezed my shoulder. We had won, but Judge Morrison still was not finished. I am also ordering an investigation into Miss Carmichael's conduct as HOA president. Filing false complaints with government agencies is a serious matter. If the investigation finds evidence of criminal misconduct, I will refer this case to the district attorney's office for prosecution. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. I was just doing my job. I was protecting my community. Miss Carmichael, you were harassing your neighbor and abusing your authority, Judge Morrison said sharply. Sit down. Patricia sat, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely afraid. The hearing ended, and Tom and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright April sunshine. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That went even better than I expected, Tom said, grinning. Not only did we win, but Patricia might face criminal charges. Do you really think they will prosecute her? I asked. Depends on what the investigation turns up. Filing false police reports and false complaints with government agencies are both misdemeanors in Colorado. If they can prove she knowingly filed false information, she could be charged. Over the next few weeks, the investigation moved forward. A county investigator interviewed me, several of my clients, and various county officials. They subpoenaed Patricia's emails and phone records, and what they found was damning. Patricia had not just filed false complaints against me. She had done the same thing to 3 other residents in Pinecrest Estates over the past 2 years. One was a woman who ran a home daycare. Another was a man who had painted his house a color Patricia did not approve of. The third was a couple who had put up a fence without HOA approval. In each case, Patricia had filed false complaints with county agencies, made threats, and generally made their lives miserable. The investigation also found that she had been embezzling money from the HOA budget to pay for her personal legal fees in these disputes. On May 3rd, Patricia Carmichael was arrested and charged with filing false police reports, filing false complaints with government agencies, harassment, and embezzlement. The local news covered the story, and it quickly became a scandal in our small mountain community. The Pinecrest Estates HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. They elected Mike Reardon, my supportive neighbor, as the new president. One of his first acts was to formally apologize to me and to the other residents Patricia had harassed. Patricia's husband, Gerald, filed for divorce. Several other residents filed civil suits against her for harassment and emotional distress. Her life, which had been so carefully controlled and curated, fell apart. I felt a strange mix of emotions about it all. I was glad to be vindicated, glad that she could not hurt me or anyone else anymore. But I also felt a bit sad. Patricia had clearly had some deep need for control, some insecurity that she tried to fill by micromanaging everyone around her. And now she had lost everything because she could not let go. The criminal case moved through the court system over the summer. Patricia pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for probation, community service, and restitution to the HOA and to the residents she had harassed. She also had to pay my legal fees, which came to over $15,000. She and Gerald sold their house and moved away. I heard they relocated to Florida, as far from Summit County as they could get. Life in Pinecrest Estates improved dramatically. Mike Reardon was a reasonable, level-headed HOA president who focused on actual community issues rather than petty enforcement of minor rules. The neighborhood Facebook group became a friendly place where people shared information and helped each other out. My business continued to grow. The publicity from the court case actually brought me more clients. People appreciated that I had stood up to an abusive HOA and won. I hired 2 employees and bought another truck. Rocky Mountain Emergency Snow Services became one of the most respected snow removal companies in Summit County. I dated a woman named Rachel Jensen for a while, a paramedic I met through my work with the hospital. She was smart, funny, and understood the demands of emergency services work. We are taking things slow, but it is going well. On December 22nd, 2025, we got hit with another major snowstorm. My phone started ringing at midnight. I kissed Rachel goodbye and climbed into my truck, ready to work through the night. As I fired up the plow and pulled out of my driveway, I noticed lights on in several of my neighbors' houses. Mike Reardon came out and gave me a thumbs up. Susan Reardon brought me a thermos of hot coffee. Other neighbors waved from their windows. This was what community really meant. Not rigid rules and power trips, but people understanding and supporting each other. People recognizing that we all have different roles to play, different contributions to make. I worked through that night and into the morning, clearing emergency access routes, making sure hospitals and fire stations could function, helping the people who needed it most. It was cold, exhausting work, but it was important work, work that mattered, and nobody called the cops on me. By the time the sun came up, the roads were clear and the emergency was over. I drove home tired but satisfied. Rachel was waiting with breakfast and a warm smile. I thought about Patricia sometimes, about how different things might have been if she had just been reasonable from the start. If she had taken 2 minutes to understand why I was working those hours, if she had recognized that emergency services were important, if she had shown even a little empathy or flexibility. But she had not, and that choice had cost her everything. As for me, I had my business, my home, my community, and a future that looked brighter than ever. I had stood up for what was right, and the law had backed me up. The judge had seen through Patricia's harassment and recognized that emergency services work was protected and necessary. That was all I had ever wanted. Not special treatment, not to be above the rules, just to be allowed to do my job, to help people, to make my community safer. And now I could do exactly that, without fear of harassment or retaliation. The snow kept falling that winter and I kept working. Each storm brought new challenges, new emergencies, new opportunities to serve. And each time I fired up my plow in the middle of the night, I felt grateful that I lived in a place where the law protected people who were trying to help, rather than those who abused power for their own petty satisfaction. Mike Reardon and I became good friends. He had actually been dealing with Patricia's overreach for years before my situation brought things to a head. He told me stories about some of her more ridiculous demands, like the time she tried to ban Christmas decorations because they were tacky, or when she insisted that everyone in the neighborhood had to use the same brand of mailbox. Under Mike's leadership, the HOA became what it should have been all along. A simple administrative body that handled common area maintenance, organized neighborhood events, and dealt with actual problems rather than invented ones. The atmosphere in Pinecrest Estates changed completely. People smiled more, interacted more, helped each other more. In March of 2026, exactly 1 year after the incident that started everything, Mike organized a neighborhood appreciation dinner. He specifically asked me to come and to bring Rachel. I was not sure what to expect, but I agreed. When we arrived at the community clubhouse, I was shocked to see that the entire event was actually a thank you celebration for me. There was a banner that said, "Thank you, Randall," and tables full of food that my neighbors had prepared. Mike stood up to give a speech. I wanted to bring everyone together tonight to recognize Randall Zimmerman. A year ago, he stood up to an abusive HOA president who was making all our lives difficult. He did not back down, even when threatened with fines and legal action, and because of his courage, we all benefited. Patricia's removal led to positive changes for everyone in this community. So thank you, Randall, for fighting the good fight. Everyone applauded, and I felt embarrassed but also deeply moved. I had not fought Patricia for recognition or praise. I had done it because it was the right thing to do, because I needed to protect my business and my ability to serve my clients. But it felt good to know that my neighbors appreciated it. Rachel squeezed my hand as I stood up to say a few words. Thank you all for this. I did not do anything special. I just wanted to do my job and help people. That is all any of us should want. To live our lives, do our work, and treat each other with respect. That is what makes a real community. More applause, and then the evening turned into a genuine celebration. People shared stories about Patricia's worst moments, laughing about them now that she was gone. There was a lightness in the air that had not existed before, a sense of freedom and relief. Susan Reardon pulled me aside at one point. You know, Patricia almost destroyed us. My husband and I were seriously considering moving because of her. She filed complaints about our garden, said it was not in keeping with community aesthetics. She tried to fine us for having a vegetable patch. A vegetable patch. But after watching you fight back, we decided to stay and to help change things. So thank you. I heard similar stories from other neighbors throughout the evening. Patricia had terrorized multiple people, and my case had given them all courage to stand up and demand change. The investigation into Patricia had revealed even more troubling behavior. She had been secretly using HOA funds to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on residents she did not like. She had tried to manipulate elections for the HOA board by intimidating potential candidates. She had even attempted to change the community guidelines without proper votes or authorization. The embezzlement charges were the most serious. Over a 3-year period, she had stolen nearly $40,000 from HOA funds, using the money to pay for her personal legal battles, expensive home renovations, and luxury purchases. She had covered her tracks by creating fake invoices and manipulating financial records. The judge had been lenient with probation partly because Patricia had cooperated and shown remorse, but also because sending her to prison would have meant the HOA would never recover the stolen money. As part of her plea deal, she had to sell assets and make full restitution. All of this came out during the investigation that followed my court case. If she had just left me alone, if she had not pushed her harassment to the point where I had to fight back legally, none of it would have been discovered. Her own vindictiveness had been her downfall. I thought about that sometimes. How often do petty tyrants get away with abuse simply because no one has the resources or courage to fight back? How many Patricia Carmichaels are out there right now, making people miserable with their power trips? My case had become something of a landmark in HOA law in Colorado. Tom told me that other lawyers were citing it in their own cases involving HOA overreach. The precedent that emergency services contracts trumped HOA restrictions had been formally established. I also heard from people across the country who were dealing with similar situations. My story had gotten picked up by a few national news outlets and several HOA reform websites. I received emails from people thanking me for standing up, asking for advice on their own situations, sharing their own horror stories about abusive HOAs. It was overwhelming at times. I had not set out to become any kind of activist or spokesperson. I just wanted to clear snow and live my life. But I realized that my fight had meant something to a lot of people, had given them hope that you could stand up to bullies and win. Rachel and I moved in together that summer. She had been renting an apartment in Silverthorne, and it made sense to consolidate. Plus, we were happy together and ready to take that next step. She fit into the neighborhood perfectly. As a paramedic, she understood the importance of my work. She had even been on duty the night of that first big storm, the night Patricia called the cops on me. She told me that the ambulances I had helped that night had been transporting a heart attack victim and a stroke patient, both of whom needed immediate emergency care. If those access roads had not been clear, we might have lost them, she told me. What you did mattered, Randall. Never doubt that. Business continued to boom. The following winter was even busier than the previous one. I hired 2 more employees and bought another truck. We were handling snow removal for half of Summit County, and I had to turn away new clients because we were at capacity. I thought about expanding, opening a second location in Eagle County or Grand County. But I wanted to keep the business manageable, to maintain the personal relationships I had with my clients, quality over quantity. In April of 2027, I was invited to speak at a conference on emergency services management in Denver. They wanted me to talk about the legal issues surrounding emergency response work and how to deal with regulatory obstacles. It was a surreal experience standing on a stage in front of hundreds of emergency services professionals, but people seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. During the Q&A session, a fire chief from Pueblo asked, "What would you say to someone who is dealing with an HOA or local government that is trying to prevent them from doing their job?" I thought about it for a moment. Document everything. Keep records of all your contracts, all communications, all complaints and harassment. Get support from your clients, especially if they are government agencies or emergency services. And do not be afraid to fight back legally if you have to. Bullies rely on people being too afraid or too tired to stand up. But the law is on your side if you are doing legitimate emergency services work. Use it. More applause, and after the panel, several people came up to shake my hand and share their own stories. Rachel was there to support me, sitting in the front row. Afterward, we walked around downtown Denver, enjoying the spring weather and talking about the future. "You know, you are kind of a celebrity now," she teased. "The guy who took down the evil HOA president." "I am not a celebrity," I protested. "I just wanted to clear snow." "And you became a symbol of standing up to petty tyranny. Own it." I laughed. Maybe she was right. Maybe my story did mean something bigger than just my personal situation. We got married that fall in a small ceremony in Breckenridge. Our neighbors from Pinecrest Estates came, along with colleagues from the hospital and fire departments. Mike Reardon was one of my groomsmen. It was a perfect day, surrounded by people who mattered. Patricia was not there, of course. She was somewhere in Florida, hopefully learning to let go of her need for control and to treat people with respect. I did not wish her ill. I just wanted her to leave me and people like me alone. As Rachel and I danced at our reception, I looked around at all the smiling faces, at the community we had built. This was what life was supposed to be. Not fighting over stupid rules or power plays, but supporting each other, celebrating together and making room for everyone to contribute in their own way. The snow would come again soon, and when it did, I would be ready. My trucks were maintained and waiting. My employees were trained and reliable. My contracts were secure and legally protected. And if another Patricia Carmichael ever tried to stop me from doing my job, from helping people who needed it, I would fight back just as hard as I had before. Because some things are worth fighting for. Public safety. The right to earn a living. The freedom to contribute to your community without harassment. The judge had sided with me. The law had protected me. And I would never forget the lesson, that standing up to bullies, even when it is scary and uncertain, is always worth it. Because in the end, what matters is not following every petty rule, but doing what is right, helping people, serving your community, and treating others with the respect and dignity that Patricia Carmichael never understood. The music played and Rachel smiled up at me, and I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Home in the mountains, surrounded by good people, doing work that mattered. The legal battle was over. The harassment had ended, and life finally was good.